first time in half a century, there will be a public hearing on UFOs. A House Intelligence Subcommittee will hear from 2 senior Pentagon officials tomorrow.
If Congress can't get answers on something this simple from the Pentagon, how can we expect that Congress really knows what's going on with the Pentagon at all?
Federal lawmakers who have been briefed on the sightings say we're dealing with something quite different this time. And NASA Administrator Bill Nelson said it's something that the space agency is very serious about.
Of course, there's another theory that this is adversary technology from Russia or China, for example. But, you know, the extraterrestrial hypothesis is out there too.
So they're generals in the military, and sometimes they refer to the end game as far as a military strategy. Obviously, these propulsion devices, such as the Tic Tac, has some heavy propulsion. How concerned are some of these guys in regards to this private corporation possibly having this power?
Well, this comes up in every meeting I've had since the 90s, is that when people begin to look into this, whether you're an admiral or a general, what's going to happen is that once you realize that there's an organization that have technologies that can do circles around the B-2 stealth, then they immediately feel outgunned. And they are. Technologically, they absolutely are outgunned. So the question then becomes, you have to have a different strategy, because you're not going to resolve this problem in a conventional confrontational way. You're going to have to do things where you disclose the information, you get the people on your side, you use the rule of law. So the end game is that, unless there's enough pressure put on these guys that they capitulate and they come clean. And we'll see. I mean, it's hard to know how that will all play out. On the other hand, they may hit the button for a false flag or some other event. This is what you don't know when you're dealing with people who are sociopaths and crazy people who have that much power. I call it the Dr. Strangelove syndrome, where they just get crazy.
Washington, D.C. may remain divided by partisan animosity on most things, but some things apparently just still rise above politics. And considering the national security implications, the House of Representatives voted unanimously to create a secure government system for reporting UFOs.
People around the president, may say, look, this is an inevitable situation, so, we want to be on the right side of this and begin to cooperate openly. But, that remains to be seen. I think that they're also intimidated by the power behind some of these beyond black projects, that it's a frightening proposition. And unfortunately, that's a real problem because, as I mentioned, intimidation is a big issue.
At least there's been some official sort of channel being created here for these pilots and who are witnessing all sorts of things to be able to come forward and discuss these things without harming their own careers. Obviously a major issue.
One of my roles is to try to say, look, just stay the course. This is an intimidation. It's more of a mind trick. But a lot of these folks, they're going to be intimidated and then they're going to fall silent. I know that's happened to a number of presidents, and the ones where it hasn't happened, they were given just enough information to make them develop policies that run to the favor of these covert programs. I think that's what happened with Reagan, with SDI. Star Wars is quite likely, I believe, that's what happened with Trump and Pence with the Space Force and some other things. So, because remember, if you're the fox guarding the hen house, you can walk into the Oval Office and present all kinds of frightening looking stuff that would be convincing to someone who's come into the Oval Office as a peanut farmer like Carter, or a real estate developer like Trump, or whatever you fill in the blank. So they're very vulnerable. This is one of the big problems with this kind of secrecy. If there's corruption in the system, which there is, then the president and his inner circle that he appoints and brings in are very vulnerable to either the information being partial or false or completely withheld. And fixing that is a major investigation that's going to require like I said, subpoena power and the willing to go the distance. Once people are identified and places are identified, and say, look, this is, you are now going to be compelled to disclose this information. Now, even if that happens, then the question becomes, whether it's out of Capitol Hill or the White House, how much of that will make it out to the United States public?
Yeah, I think one of the really big problems the public doesn't understand about this, and I've been dealing with this since '93, that when you meet with a lot of these officials who are not read in to these projects and they find out it's true, they're traumatized. I mean, it's traumatic. I think for the public, it's like, oh, a conspiracy theory, it's entertaining, it's something to Google, it's something to, troll the internet. But if you're actually on Capitol Hill or the White House or the Pentagon or CIA in a responsible position, and you find out that there's an entire universe, a whole secret government program that's massive, that you don't know about and you're not overseeing, even though you are required to oversee it, it's a shock. It's traumatic, and I've been very compassionate about that and working with folks since the 90s. And more recently, these guys who, they've been special forces and they've done all kinds of things all over the world, and they are genuinely traumatized by it because it's a sort of a mind-blowing situation. And for that reason, we know that when you start talking about the leaders who are elected, the constitutionally appointed and elected leaders, they're going to have to be brought up to speed in a graduated way. Now, it could be a year, but it isn't going to be in one meeting. It might be in 20 briefings or something. And so what I recommended is that a set of briefing modules be put together that go over the whole course of the history of this, but then all of the facilities and the operations, but then also all the technologies, starting with the basic ones, how those things fly, to the more esoteric ones. Compartmented operations underneath the Pentagon, the Technology Management Office, for example. Some of the folks that I've been dealing with who literally oversee all the agencies and all that and black budget funding, they literally, when I mention these facilities, they've never heard of them. They don't know where they are. So I think that, when you're talking about most of Washington, they're just now beginning to ask any questions. But, so it's not like there's any great efforts. Now, when someone begins to make these inquiries, then they have surveillance, they have Black Hawk helicopters over their house and all that kind of stuff. But that's just recently begun. Over the years, though, whether it's a president or anyone else who pushes too far into this, I recently found out that a congressman I had briefed way back, named Congressman Christopher Cox of Orange County, when I put the facilities list together for him that listed all the contractors and all this, he had two guys approach him and threaten him with death and his family with death if he were to talk about this any further or make any more inquiries. And he was on the Science and Technology Committee of the House of Representatives. So that kind of stuff does happen. Unfortunately, he didn't notify me of this, so it happened and then he backed off. And I think that's one of the real problems. I mean, there is lethal force threatened. There's all kinds of intimidation. I've had people break into my home. I've had people break into my condo here and just move things around to let them know we can get in here anytime we want. And I think for a lot of people who are elected officials and they start running into this, they don't realize what kind of buzzsaw is out there, how serious these guys have been about keeping this secret. So, a couple of days ago, I was on an encrypted messaging system with a top secret guy who was wanting to come forward. And in real time, he was sending me video of Blackhawks that were circling his house out in the middle of nowhere, way out in the upper Midwest. So that really does happen. But, most of those enforcement issues,
You're not going to see it at the Situation Room in the White House or a skiff up on Capitol Hill.
Eagle has landed.
Tonight, NASA accepting a mission that so far has proven harder than landing a man on the moon.
What's your thoughts like now NASA's getting into the game of UFO hunting?
The release from NASA was that they were going to allocate $100,000 to look into this. Let me explain how $100,000 will get you 2 paper clips, maybe. So again, I don't think anything serious is going to be done by NASA. My understanding is they're doing things to check off a box, but there is an investigation that we can talk about that is very effective and that's working, and that is really getting to the bottom of it. It is not at NASA. If you're seeing it in the media or on Politico or on the internet, those are all things that they're just wanting to check boxes so that members of Congress feel like they're doing something. It's like when I grew up in the South, they'd say, look busy, Jesus is coming. There was this whole mindset of you just do busy work. So the Pentagon office, this NASA initiative, I would like to be proven wrong, and certainly if those guys invited me in to get actionable intelligence, detailed information, I'd absolutely do it, but we'll see. I mean, you know, a broken clock is right twice a day. It's possible that they'll actually do something, but they're not going to do anything with $100,000, which is why in their release it said they were going to allocate.
Is NASA being straight with us?
I don't.
Apparently, they're getting into UFO hunt right now too. They say
they are. The American public turns it up. Not on the Tim Burton's of the world. I'm already there. I know we got to do something. We better find out. I think we need to find out.
So with this evidence coming in from NASA, for the years of third phase of moon, we've been keeping a close eye on them. They're one of the most biggest archives of the UFO phenomenon that exists right now. We could tell NASA, go back to this date, go back to this ISS footage, and let's start there. And again, we have hundreds of videos from NASA themselves that they refuse to explain to the public what they're capturing. How can we change the narrative of NASA to be a little bit more of a straight answer instead of never a straight answer?
We got to get more people than me in Congress that are going to ask those tough questions.
You know, we're talking about NASA and what NASA hasn't done all these years since the last time we were on the moon. You know, they want to go into the UFO studies. They have thousands of images that have been taken by the astronauts, either at the International Space Station or on the shuttle, or even going back to Gemini and on Apollo. So for them to just get into it, say they're getting into it now, why haven't they been investigating it since they were formed? That's their job.
I think it's really exciting. It almost feels like opening a new book.
NASA's announcement coming on the heels of a new office set up at the Pentagon to investigate top secret encounters between pilots and unidentified aerial phenomena.
What you get is double speak. You never get a straight answer. NASA reports to us. We're their employer. They've lost credibility. We're falling by the wayside, and our federal government is failing us.
As for what they are?
So far, we've seen NASA say that there's no evidence that this is extraterrestrial life. But does that mean that it's not extraterrestrial life?
I'm a scientist, and if somebody asks me, is this extraterrestrial life? Frankly, at this moment in time, the simple answer is the right one, which is I don't know.
The fact that this office just said that they're only going to investigate UFOs that are not man-made, right? What that tells you is that my message, your message, and the message of many other people that we know these Tic Tacs are actually man-made vehicles, devices. That message has gotten back to them. It's gotten back to them. And so now they're experiencing a lot of loss of traction.
And is this one of the phenomena that we can't explain?
I do not have an explanation for what this specific object is. When I say we can't explain, I mean exactly as you described there, that there is a lot of information, like the video that we showed, in which there's simply too little data to create a reasonable explanation. When I say unexplained, I mean everything from too little data to the data that we have doesn't point us towards an explanation.
What I call Operation Failsafe. All of these Tic Tacs, all of these UAPs, sometimes called UATs. T is for threat, right? They're losing a lot of traction. And the momentum that they had, you know, I don't know, like 6 months ago, when this was all going to come out of congressional committee hearings and records, and the NIDS was the National Intelligence Director was going to answer a lot of questions and release a lot of information. All this stuff added up to basically nothing. Added up to nothing. And now they're realizing it. So now they're trying to they're going to follow the same narrative. And the narrative is going to be, hey, we have nothing to do with man-made UAPs. We're not looking into that at all. That's not even a factor in the stuff we're doing. And they're saying it expressly, but in an indirect way. All of these things that we're studying, that we're looking at, they're all extraterrestrial. They're all interdimensional also. They're genuine alien vehicles, let's say. They're not man-made, no matter what. And I don't think that's not really gonna help them too much in the long run, because there have been so many people that have been looking at these videos, been looking at these things. We see no clues that lead us to the conclusion that this is definitely extraterrestrial. It looks man-made, it just does. And that's gonna be haunting them now, moving forward from here forward. And what they say gives it away. It gives it away that they are very concerned about that.
Through our own ability to capture some of these UFO craft, I believe that the US military and maybe even other militaries in other countries have captured a few of these and have been reverse engineering UFOs for quite some time. I believe that the actual incident that happened in Roswell was a UFO that was brought down by a scalar weapon. We actually brought the UFO craft down. They disoriented its control system and brought it down. And so by doing this, we were able to capture that device, to take it to a top secret military base, and start to try to figure out how to reverse engineer it. There have been people who have come out talking about the fact that Velcro, fiber optics, and microchips all came from the reverse engineering from 1947 of the Roswell craft.
I've talked to people that have handled material, that have stated that it is something different, that they could break it down pretty much into what it was, but how it was layered and how it was attached, without blending too much, is still a mystery. And
is this
so
crash retrieval? Is this crash retrieval?
They thought it was, but there again, you have to be real careful with that stuff, because if you spend $1 million chasing something and analyzing it, and it's something that's been created in a lab, and they just trying to chase us down the wrong path.
When it comes to material that we have no material. We have detected no emanations within the UAP task force that would suggest it's anything non-terrestrial in origin. So there's when I say unexplained, I mean everything from too little data to the data that we have doesn't point us towards an explanation, but we'll go wherever the data takes us. Again, we've made no assumptions about what this is or isn't. We're committed to understanding these, and so we'll go wherever that data takes us.
Are we going to have more UFO Congress hearings coming up in the future here?
I doubt it.
Is there anything else that stood out to you in regards to?
Yes, I mean, at 51 minutes, you have Scott Bray, ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, say, when it comes to material that we have, nothing would suggest non-terrestrial origin.
A number of these UAPs, you said, we can't explain. Again, in the service of sort of reducing speculation and conspiracy theories, we can't explain can range from a visual observation that was distant on a foggy night, we don't know what it is, to we've found an organic material that we can't identify, right? Those are radically different worlds. So when you say we can't explain, give the public a little bit better sense of where on that spectrum of we can't explain we are. Are we holding materials, organic or inorganic, that we don't know about? Are we, picking up emanations that are something other than light or infrared that could be deemed to be communications? Give us a sense for what you mean when you say we can't explain.
Sure. When I say we can't explain, I mean exactly as you described there, that there is a lot of information, like the video that we showed, in which there's simply too little data.
Well, recently there were some congressional hearings where they actually had active military basically testifying before Congress that they had encounters with UFOs and UAPs. They're calling them UAPs now. And what's interesting is they even had 11 encounters where they almost had an impact with these things. They've almost crashed into them. They've been caught on radar, they've been heavily tracked, and admittedly by the Pentagon, they are able to make maneuvers that we cannot even conceive of doing right now with our current technology. And so the reason why all the redaction is there is because they don't want the public to know truly how sophisticated these things really are, and also to add a little tiny bit of questioning as to whether they are ours or if they are UFOs. In other words, they're claiming that these things exist, but at the same time, they're not officially really stating, yes, these are alien craft from another world. What they want to do is keep that question mark there. By keeping the question mark, they keep control of the narrative. And by controlling the narrative, they control the money from the general population. So right now we have the Space Force, which now is going to be allowed to extract trillions of dollars into projects that they can now claim are to protect Earth from these unknowns, these UAPs. And so it really is another driving force of creating revenue for the military, because right now there's no more wars on the planet. There's nobody else to fight. We've brought democracy to everybody, and now we've turned everything into dust, and now the only way we can make more money in military is to take the war to space.
It's the crash retrievals that are the Rosetta Stone for solving the UFO cover-up, or the Cosmic Watergate as it's called, because it's the crash retrievals that have all the evidence we need. The bodies, the debris, the craft, the autopsies, the reports, the 8x10 glossy black and whites, the gun camera footage. It's all wrapped around the crash retrieval. So if we can, as a group of ufologists, get access to that debris, the bodies, the craft, then we can change the world. But it has to be handed over to the scientific community as a united coalition so that they can third-party independently verify what we're looking at here. Because we could be looking at hoaxes, we could be looking at red herrings off to the side. These guys are very good at keeping secrets. So we'd need a third-party independent source to verify this, and then we can come out with it.
Yeah, well, one of the most ridiculous parts of this NASA getting into the UFO business. Yeah, they made the statement that they're not going to have anything to do with man-made UFOs. Well, how in the heck do you know if it's man-made unless you investigate it, unless you have some good imagery? So the fact that we don't have anything sharp, we don't have anything definitive of what a UFO or a UAP, it's a friggin' flying saucer. And for NASA to have all this stuff in their files already, it makes no sense. It's really an insult to those of us that have been digging, those of us who have spent time and energy trying to track this stuff down, and we're just getting nothing but double talk from NASA. They're not doing their job. They're not producing product that we bought and paid for.
Let me ask you this. This is kind of a new news that has been developing, the language in Washington. They have their new UFO office that they're setting up. I guess they got, I don't know, some kind of budget. It's pretty small, but they've made a statement saying that they're not going to investigate man-made objects, the man-made UFOs. What does this tell you in regards to the possibility that humans ourselves, a private corporation, have cracked the code in propulsion, and it just so happens that you may capture these on your instruments, but what if these UFOs could be man-made, and now they're just kind of rolling that out, that they don't want to investigate anything that's man-made? But again, what if there's something that is out there, such as a Tic Tac, that is man-made, and you so happen to capture that on your instruments? Would you report that to the public?
No, I mean, if it looks like it's human-made, I'll be glad to deliver it to Washington, D.C. without analyzing it. It's not of interest to me.
NASA or Galileo project, if they were to capture something in our solar system, like a craft approaching Earth, would they be able to get that out to the public right away, or would national security kick in?
Well, it depends on who's funding them and what kind of contract they have. Again, I think it's going to have to be somebody who's going to have to leak it. Somebody's going to have to leak it and just put it out.
And risk prosecution.
I mean, what everyone needs to know that there's now an official mechanism for whistleblowers and people who are under non-disclosure agreements to come forward. And that law makes a pathway for people to come forward. Now, the problem is, Politico and a lot of news organizations have had stories about that, but those folks, who are they going to contact? So what I'm saying, I'm making an appeal here, they should contact me at our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS disclosure.com. There's a contact box just for witnesses, military whistleblowers, and that will get passed on to me, and then I can bring those people to the correct folks here in Washington who are in charge of this investigation. Because most people would try to contact that Pentagon office. That's not where anything's happening, all right? So the folks I'm working with are involved with the intelligence and military and those committees, National Security Council, et cetera. And they're the ones who actually are going the distance and drilling the deepest on this. And in the last year, since I've been providing really specific intelligence and introducing them to certain key people, they've actually gotten dozens of people to come forward, and there's actually a whistleblower suit proceeding, but it's very classified at this point. So that's really big news, because in my 32 years of working on this issue, having met with all kinds of folks over the years, it's only in the last 6-8 months, maybe a year, that what I just said has been even a possibility. No one's ever taken it this far before. And the reason it happened is that there's a more clandestine group that are on the right side of disclosing this, that are doing it under the authority of the bill that was passed. And in fact, a couple of them actually helped write that bill. So I think this is a really exciting development. It's very good news. Now, a footnote. The U.S. government moves at the speed of molasses in winter. So, and I caution people that it's a process. I think it's going to be a year or two. But in the fact that I've been doing this for 32 years, that's the speed of light, because frankly, before right now, when I've provided materials to the president or to other members of the Congress, back in the 90s and early 2000s, I briefed members of the Senate Intelligence Committee and chairmen of committees in the House. No one wanted to pursue this. And there wasn't a mechanism for them to. That was a legal mechanism, because if they made an inquiry, they'd be saying, it's none of your business, you don't have a clearance. Well, now there's a mechanism where it's actually mandated by law that the Director of National Intelligence and the government provide material to these oversight committees of the Congress. That's very different. That's a whole new ballgame. So that's really exciting. And I think that's a door that's open now. I don't predict how long that door will be open. It could close like that. We want to move through that door with as much information, whistleblowers, evidence. The other thing is that our group separately, the Disclosure Project in 1997 and 98, declared these illegally run classified projects a criminal organization. And we stated that anybody who has information, documents, materials are free to speak to us and to the public. That was a letter that's called a unless otherwise directed letter, UNOD. And my military advisor said, look, this is how you have to do this. So the way it's worded is, unless directed otherwise, this is our assessment. These projects are being run illegally, therefore we can disclose any document, classified or not, any testimony or material parts without penalty of the law. And from 1998, which I gave them a 60-day period to respond, to now, no one has ever contradicted that assessment. And in fact, the people now that I've been meeting with know that what I said about that is 100% true, that the projects that are being operating, dealing with the UFO, UAP issue, all that has been run completely illegally without oversight. And where the thuggery of threatening even officials, as I mentioned, a member of Congress that I briefed, being threatened with he and his family being killed. So that is the sort of thing that you're now crossed the line. You're outside the umbrella of the Constitution and the rule of law. Therefore, they're playing naked, and that's what we've been saying. But what I said in 97 and 98, which was the foundation of these first group of military whistleblowers to come forward in 2001 with the Disclosure Project here in DC at the National Press Club, that's now gotten to the point where it's enshrined in the law. And so that's a really big development, because before it was a civilian with no standing making this statement. And for a lot of military guys, they say, well, that's probably legally true because we ran it past our constitutional attorneys, but I'm still afraid. Well, now I can say, now there's people to give you protection and a mechanism. So if we're ever going to get this resolved, here's the window. Let's move through it.
You know, the commander of NORAD, which is the North American Air Defense Command, it's jointly managed by both Canadian and U.S. forces. He said that their systems, which are designed to thwart a Soviet attack or a Russian attack or now a Chinese attack on our mainland, said they haven't picked up anything they consider extraterrestrial. How do you know it's not an alien craft? How do you know it's not something that the Lockheed Skunk Works created, or the Boeing/McDonnell Douglas Phantom Works? We don't know.
Recently, the commander of NORAD actually stated that they have no evidence of UFOs or aliens. And he was kind of really being sarcastic. They have a lot of evidence of UFOs and aliens because information has been being released and declassified for decades, including the new ATIP documents. What he really is saying is, we have information about UAPs and UFOs, but we don't want to share it with you. And we're not going to actually openly claim that these are actual alien craft or spacecraft that are not created by us, because if we do that, and we're the ones in control of protecting airspace over the world, then we look like we're inadequate and we can't do our jobs. So that's why they do this. They do this to give the citizens of the world a false sense of protection or security that they do have control and they can protect us, when in actuality, they cannot control these beings whatsoever.
There is a little bit of a discrepancy here, because how can you declassify something that you don't have access to? So if we go to the Senate and Armed Services Committee in Washington, D.C., and we ask them to pull the files, if they don't have access to it, or if they're not read into the program, we're never going to get it. So that's this delicate line that's being kind of crossed here. Somehow we need to get access to these programs, but still keeping under the umbrella of national security. And so you can see the way this government is trying to play this. They're trying to keep the secrets on one end, but then on the other end, we've got these congressional hearings that are just, they're almost throwaways. They're really not doing anything. They're not moving this field any further.
It's also been reported that there have been UAP observed and interacting with and flying over sensitive military facilities, particularly, and not just ranges, but some facilities housing our strategic nuclear forces. One such incident allegedly occurred at Malmstrom Air Force Base, in which 10 of our nuclear ICBMs were rendered inoperable. At the same time, a glowing red orb was observed overhead. I'm not commenting on the accuracy of this. I'm simply asking you whether you're aware of it and whether you have any comment on the accuracy of that report.
Let me pass that to Mr. Bray. You've been looking at UAPs over the last 3 years.
That data is not within the holdings of the UAP task force.
I know that our government and the military hasn't been sitting on their hands on this situation, because if it's a threat to national security, if these unknowns can fly over a military strategic missile facility like Francis E. Warren or Minot Air Force Base, and they control virtually all of the Minuteman IIIs that are in the upper Midwest. For them not to get excited or have some of the best equipment, monitoring equipment going when these things have been shutting down ballistic missile sites. They're not interconnected. They're separated because that's their protection. And some craft, this number of years ago, literally shut down over half of the silos in the missile complex.
Okay, but are you aware of the report, or that the data exists somewhere?
I have heard stories. I have not seen the official data on that.
So you've just seen informal stories, no official assessment that you've done or exists within DoD that you're aware of regarding the Malmstrom incident?
All I can speak to is what's within my cognizance, the UAP task force, and we have not looked at that incident.
When he was saying that he had absolutely no knowledge of unknown alien craft overflying our military installations and affecting our nuclear triad, the man should have been fired right there. I mean, that's gross incompetence. If they're there representing the federal government and we're going to take our best and brightest and we're going to investigate unknown aerial phenomena, also called UFOs, and you have someone who has absolutely no idea of what of some of the instances that is general public that I know about. People who aren't military historians or whatever have read about it. It's been on the front pages. It's been on the news.
Well, I would say, it's a pretty high-profile incident. I don't claim to be an expert on this, but that's out there in the ether. You're the guys investigating it. I mean, who else is doing it?
If something was officially brought to our attention, we would look at it. There are many things that are out there in the ether that aren't officially brought to our attention.
So how would it have to be officially brought to your attention? I'm bringing it to your attention.
Sure, so,
this is pretty official.
Sure. So we'll go back and take a look at it, but generally there is some authoritative figure that says there is an incident that occurred. We'd like you to look at this. But in terms of just tracking what may be in the media that says that something occurred at this time, at this place, there are probably a lot of leads that we would have to follow up on. I don't think we have resources to do that right now.
Well, I don't claim to be an authoritative figure, but for what it's worth, I would like you to look into it. And
sure.
If for no other reason, you could dismiss it and say this is not worth wasting resources on.
I was listening to these witnesses, and I'm saying, my gosh, if I was that stupid, and that's the only word I can, that or incompetent. I'm up there in front of the world talking about a subject matter that everybody has an interest in, even if it's remote interest. When you say, hey, there's flying saucers out there, there's things that go bump at night, everybody sort of goes, oh, really? So it's not something that it's a fly-by-night. It's not something that doesn't spark anybody's interest. But to have two people up there representing our government, which we're supposed to be the best and the brightest, coming across as an absolute fool. And they were coming across like a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses have come up to your door and they weren't prepared to speak about the Almighty. I mean, it was a joke. It was a joke. It's a waste of time.
These documents include reports on the biological effects of UFO sightings on humans, something we haven't heard before. The report describes 42 cases where humans sustained injuries after alleged encounters with, quote, anomalous vehicles. In some of the cases, humans, the Pentagon says, showed burn injuries or other conditions related to electromagnetic radiation.
What do you make of this? These UAP encounters that cause brain trauma when you get in close proximity to it, from Gary Nolan. Is this proper language?
Well, look, a couple months ago there was a 1,500-page release from the Department of Defense of alleged contact cases with UFOs that resulted in all kinds of injuries. And those cases were put together by a senior member of the covert programs that have been staging fake events, false events, named Dr. Kit Green. He's a fellow physician. in Ohio, and we know that it was stated that he had facilitated putting that together, where he talked about people had brain injuries and burns and unwanted pregnancies. Well, of course, this is now being, as I predicted, as we move forward with actual disclosure, secret government programs through their lackeys, through their operatives, are going to create a narrative.
Gary Nolan is definitely at the top of that list. He's a Stanford professor, Stanford PhD, he's an immunologist. And he has, over the last decade or two, spent a lot of time studying the harmful effects that apparent encounters with UFOs have on the human brain.
Now remember, every one of those cases they're presenting were covert human projects targeting civilians with these sort of injuries.
But this report comes from a shadowy Pentagon department that was shut down in 2012. And the ailments listed after these experiences, as you say, the most common experience, by the way, is abduction, and radiation burns, paralysis, brain damage, even sexual encounters.
Don't take my word for it. Dr. Jacques Vallée, who has published a book in 1992, stated point blank that he had a document from 1985, that a CIA official document, explaining how they were abducting people in South America, making it look like an alien encounter for its, and I'm quoting, psychological warfare value. So what people have to understand is this is a 60, 70 year sort of brainwashing plan. So you get people like Nolan and others who appear in the media, those doors open for them because they're going to tell the public the false information that the secret keepers want people to believe. Well, to what end?
It's unmistakable. You have to say, okay, well, what did that? I can conjecture or hypothesize about, is it the Russians, is it UFOs or whatever, but the fact is there is data that says something is happening, and so we need to study it. And that's what a scientist should do.
So, of course, oh, absolutely. But so for some context, who were these people who'd been injured?
Dr. Gary Nolan has recently come out and stated that people have had adverse effects to UFOs or being in a location where UFOs recently were located. Now, these effects seem to have affected their mind, their skin, and some type of illness or sickness had fallen over them, kind of like radiation sickness or radiation poisoning. When you look at this other guide that exists called the Firefighter's Disaster Guide, which is distributed to all firefighters in the United States, they actually have a section in this guide, you can get this on Amazon. It talks about how to deal with disasters dealing with UFOs and what some of the actual side effects are of coming in contact with UFOs. They teach this to firefighters. They say that people get sick, they get ill, they have mental problems. So all of a sudden we see what Dr. Gary Nolan is talking about isn't really a conspiracy. It's something that the firefighters in America, which are required to save lives, actually think really exists. Could it be another program by the United States military where they test different types of technologies on their own citizens? We know that they've done this over many, many decades. We know that they tested chemicals and all different types of hallucinogenics on their own military officers without even telling them. They've actually even given soldiers different types of STDs and diseases to see how they would play out. So this is something that we know is factual and actually happens. Could there be another program where they're actually impregnating women through some type of alternative technology? We just don't know. All we can do is hypothesize. All we can do is maybe speculate. But there seems to be something strange going on, and I believe that the government knows exactly what it is.
They want to create, as Werner von Braun stated, an alien threat that doesn't exist for the warmongers and the war profiteers and the military-industrial complex. It's very simple. So this has been put in place since the 50s. All you have to do is pull the CIA Director Smith's memo from 1953, and we have it, where he explains the psychological warfare value of the UFO subject. So now that was almost 70 years ago, 69 years ago. So I think that this is something the public and the media have to get educated on. They're not going to get it through the UFO research community or from the media, because most people have not done their homework to find out what the counterintelligence operations are. And by that I mean the people who are embedded out there concocting all kinds of frightening stuff for its psychological warfare value, to create fear.
Well, I think there has been a realization that this is a serious defense and national security issue. And I think part of that has come from within Congress. People like Marco Rubio, for example, have spoken out quite strongly on this. But the other thing is, we've just got a lot more evidence than was previously the case. We always knew pilots saw these things.
Because if you create fear, you can control people. Demagogues have done this forever. And if you're going to have another enemy bigger than another power like China or Russia, and you want to unite the world around a military effort, which is their agenda, long term, you have to create something bigger and badder than the Russian bear or the Chinese panda or what have you. This is what's been planned. It's a 70-year plan, and we know it. Carol Rosin and Werner von Braun had seen that defense plan, and it specifically outlines exactly what we're seeing now.
I would like to make the prediction right now. I absolutely believe this with every fiber of my being, that within the next couple of months to 90 days, there's going to be no more of these near misses. Near misses are already considered a hostile action in a military kind of milieu. It already is. But what we're going to have is we're going to have direct military action from these UAPs, these Tic Tacs, which are of all shapes and sizes, by the way. And we will have a huge hostile action against an entire battleship or many airliners as well. Airliners, and we're going to see huge consequences from that, because they have to do it at this point, because people are losing interest in the UAP situation. They're seeing fraud artists like Elizondo and others that work with him as well, and people are just not impressed that much by these Tic Tacs and this 1950s videos that they're showing. People just don't care. So they have to go into the desperate, if they want to keep this alive, and they have to, because this is Operation Failsafe. It's going to be their final position of the cabal. When everything else fails and they got nothing else, they're going to have to go to fake alien invasion. That's what we're facing, that's what we're looking at, and that is something that will absolutely happen.
What they're doing, what the secret, illegal, unconstitutional government is doing, is getting both witting, knowing people who know they're putting out false information, and a lot of unwitting people, naive people, who will just take the bait. And so most of the media does not have any real depth of research on the issue. So if they get something that gets released from the Pentagon, like these 1,500 pages of terrifying accounts, they're not saying, who's doing this? Well, we know, and have known since the early 90s, and I've had it confirmed to me by dozens of operatives inside the system, that these are actually people who are humans doing these things for their sort of brainwashing value. Because if you don't have another big enemy, as one of my military advisors said back in the 90s, God help us if peace were to break out, we'd all be out of business. So, there's this sort of manipulative aspect to this, and that's what that's about. So if you just keep that in mind, when all these things are rolled out, you're gonna go, well, is it real or is it false? Obviously, I would say 90+% of everything that's gonna come out is false, and that's why people have to be very skeptical and very thorough in their research.
Dr. Greer had talked about, and he wrote a white paper that discusses this. If you've got a classified program, you've got a USAP program, unacknowledged special access program. So from the very get-go, if this is contrary to the Constitution at the very beginning, then the entire program goes against the law. So they're not bound to their national security oaths because it's extra constitutional from the very get-go. So you can see the way Greer has played this is very masterful, it's very genius. So not necessarily are all these people under this umbrella of secrecy if the entire program is extra constitutional from the very beginning. And so it's a very good play that we can capitalize on, and it might be a wedge to get in there so that some of these programs can be declassified.
What kind of programs?
Programs associated with the analysis of retrieved debris. In 1952, we have a very interesting source. She passed away now, but she was present at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where over 1,000, and I'm going to repeat, 1,000 artifacts from multiple UFO crash retrievals were, number one, photographed, bagged, tagged, and cataloged, and it's sitting in a warehouse at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base right now. So they cannot claim that they don't have physical evidence. They've got the evidence, it's just they don't have access to it, or the people below them are not read into the program.
Remember, they're very, very advanced material sciences and technologies from in human covert programs that have been reverse engineered. So whether it's a nanomolecular material that's human or something of extraterrestrial origin, you'd really have to know what you're looking for. I don't know who's possessing that material. I don't possess it. I would know what to look for. But, you know, it'd be impossible to know without the provenance of the material, but then also, you know, getting down to the nanomolecular level of how it was made, you know. You want to go right?
Right here, yeah. So what about these politicians? You know, there's a couple coming forward. Is that a positive thing? Is that this?
Yeah, there are quite a few politicians. I mean, this is how these bills were passed, and the Congress coming forward, you know, who are very interested in the issue. And over the years, I've met with many of them. At a certain point, it creates, you know, a pressure to look into this, that there's got to be something to it. That doesn't mean that they have been briefed on what's actually going on, because it takes a very long time to get to the bottom of this very deep hole, a black hole that they've created. So, you know, when you're dealing with an illegally run black project, and you're dealing with people that I've worked with for years who have clearances, you know, top secret, black projects, unacknowledged special access projects, and they don't have access.
As you know, and as Dr. Greer has talked about, the United States government does not build anything. They source it out to contractors. So a lot of these times, these programs, whatever they build, whatever they saw, whatever they reverse engineered, is outsourced and it is proprietary. So you can't throw a FOIA request at something that's proprietary because it's contractor based. So you can write all the FOIA requests you want. If it's a proprietary contractor program, they won't release it. And so that's one thing we're up against. The other thing we're up against is it doesn't matter what your rank is in the House, in the Senate, whatever you're in the Washington Beltway there, if you're not cleared and read into these programs, you're not going to get access to it. So when we have these congressional hearings that we've been recently seeing, and they don't have access to these programs, so how are they going to filter that down to the general public? They don't even have access to the program. So it's going to take a monumental crusade to, I think we have to go beyond Washington, D.C. We have to go to the scientists and we have to go to the witnesses and engineers who worked on these programs and work it that way.
Well, you know, remember, the Pentagon office is, at this stage, sort of storefront, like Project Blue Book was in the 60s. It's a very small operation. The people in there have not been read in. They've probably been told what to say. That's not where the real investigation is happening. That's a different discussion. But they're there because it was mandated by law that they be there. And, you know, of this statement that we're not going to investigate any of the man-made objects, well, you've just eliminated 80 to 90% of all UFO sightings. Now, a lot of our pilots, Navy jet and Air Force pilots, what have you, who've had these encounters, because these objects simply go so much faster, and they maneuver at right angles in a way that no conventional aircraft can, they all assume it's from outer space. They are not read into what Ben Rich of the Lockheed Skunk Works told us, and the vast majority of these UFO objects are in fact ours. They're man-made, and they're not Chinese or Russian, they're ours, American. So I think this is sort of a big They're hoodwinking the Congress, and they're actually deliberately pulling their punch on disclosing the biggest part of the secret. Now, I will say 10-20% of things that have been seen are of extraterrestrial origin. It's a minority. The majority are actually ours, and but that's a bigger secret than the alien part. Why? Because here's the linchpin of the secrecy. To disclose to the public that those are ours would also would admit that we already have the energy and propulsion systems to replace all the oil and gas and coal and nuclear power and wind and solar on the planet. Why? The sensors, the Pentagon has admitted, they're infrared sensors of the Tic Tac and these other objects. There's no heat source, there's no jets, there's no rockets, there's no nuclear device on board creating energy, because that would be a huge, as you know, nuclear fission or fusion creates an enormous amount of heat. Nothing. Well, how are they moving? Well, they're using they're using electromagnetic field propulsion, which are very high voltage systems. We understand how they work, but for these covert programs that have been run illegally and without oversight, to admit that, for any part of the US government to admit that, it'd be a scandal 1,000 times bigger than Watergate or Iran-Contra or anything you can think of. Because what it would mean is all the deaths from our space program and shuttles and Apollo missions, like my uncle worked on, and all of the pollution and all the poverty in the world and all the environmental degradation has been unnecessary since 1954. So for the past 68 years, we have not needed rockets, jets, gas engines, or any of it. Now, that statement is, I know some people would say, an outrageous statement, but it can be proven. I mean, there's plenty of documentation. Even aerospace journals back in the early 50s, before they mastered quote unquote gravity control, talk about this. So the reason this office has probably been told, I mean, they're sort of just mouthpieces saying what they're told to say by someone, that we're not going to look into the things that are made by humans, is because the ones that are human are most of them, so then they don't look into them. And number two, to disclose their existence would be to pull the curtain back on the crown jewel of the secrecy, the reason for the secrecy. Because it's all about macroeconomic and geopolitical control. And if you bring out technologies that allows every home, office, manufacturing plant, village in Africa to have its own energy source without a transmission line and burning expensive fuel, oil, gas, coal, you've just changed the whole geopolitical macroeconomic system. The power equilibrium of the world is going to shift away from a handful of global oligarchs to we the people. So it's sort of, I view this coming out properly as sort of the next American revolution, bloodless, we hope, that has to happen. It isn't a revolution. It's a revolution in thought. It's a revolution in energy, technology, science, energy, propulsion, and most importantly, how society would be structured. Because the evolution of fascism was actually powerful industrial private interests colluding with and controlling government and using government. That's the root of fascism. But that's what this is. What Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. He was using a different term for the old 1900s, early 20th century fascism. So the Antifa people and the anti-fascist people need to understand what fascism actually is and that what's going on here. Because those interests, financial, corporate, what have you, they're the tail wagging the dog of the US government. And like I said, 99+% of the US government, even the people I've worked with who manage the black budget and oversee the three-letter agencies, NSA, NRO, CIA, they've been denied access to these projects. And yet here we have all the evidence and proof for it. So I think this is a constitutional crisis, so we need the renewal of the rule of law in the Constitution. It's a civilizational crisis because of what's happened to the biosphere, but it's also a humanitarian crisis. 3 billion, with a B, people, 3 billion people don't have any way to cook their food. They don't have electricity or gas. In 2020, 2022, this came out in The Economist last year. Well, I think that in that situation, what a huge humanitarian crisis, when all that poverty, as well as the damage to the environment, could have been fixed before I was born. You know, I was born in 1955. We mastered gravity control and these energy systems in October of 1954. How do I know this? The top scientist at the Naval Research Labs, Richard Foch, was in the vault, not far from here, and saw the document that stated that and had the proof of it. Now, he didn't take it out, of course you're not allowed to, but very reliable person. I mean, he was the senior scientist at the largest Department of Defense lab in the world, here in Washington, Naval Research Lab. And routinely had briefings with the vice president and admirals and generals and stuff all the time, so he was very high clearance. So I think that this is a real crisis, and everyone thinks the crisis is coming from outer space. See, here's the technique. You set up a diversion. You look out here. There's a threat from outer space. Meanwhile, what it really is, these old crudmudgeons and these elite global money people are like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, pulling all the levers and just creating this whole insane narrative. And they're very good at doing this. They're very good at doing this. So I think this is why the public has to be very questioning the recent disclosure. When I say disclosure, I coined the term in the 90s and early 2000s as the father of the disclosure movement. It's been hijacked by people who call any false revelation disclosure. So there's 100 disclosure efforts out there now, and I'd say most of them are just putting out, it's an echo chamber of parroting the narrative and the script being written by these black projects, these illegal black projects. So I'm a big skeptic. I always have been. I mean, if you take 99% of what's presented on this subject, that you go to any conference or internet search or what have you, I go, that's false, that's false, that's false, that's false, and can be provably so, but no one's listening because it's more exciting to get all, worked up about a threat from outer space. It makes for excitement and the juices get flowing because humans love to have someone to hate, right?
We've had some of the pilots and the intelligence people talking about them, and now we learn that this is an ongoing situation and it's not just UFOs. Frankly, they've been looking at other things which sound like they come straight out of an X-Files script.
And the demagogues running these information warfare programs and psychological warfare programs, they know human nature. They know how they can trigger people into fear, but also into sort of let's unite people around an enemy.
Short of a couple of little green men landing on the south lawn or the north lawn of the White House and saying hi to the press corps there, or landing at the next Super Bowl and dropping in, what is the bridge between these videos and we know that whatever this thing is, it is not human?
They want a new enemy. They've been wanting to build up a new enemy. The Pentagon office, a lot of the folks I know in this city absolutely realize that office is sort of a window dressing to comply with the congressional bill that was passed mandating that the Director of National Intelligence and the Pentagon report to the Congress this issue. But a true investigation absolutely is not writ large. I'm on the record here and I'm in a position to say this authoritatively. It's going to happen from that office.
I think what's going to happen with UFO, we're going to have somebody on the inside who's going to have to leak it. He's going to have to leak some stuff, photographs.
Would that be in danger with breaking the NDAs?
Yeah,
again,
absolutely. They risk going to jail.
But what if what they're revealing is an illegal operation? Therefore, it'd be covering something that's illegal. So then there wouldn't be any
You trust the crooks to give you a fair trial?
If you're a whistleblower, I don't know if there's a benefit to come forward unless you're thinking big picture here, because they had to sign multiple non-disclosure agreements, so they're still bound under all of that. But again, if we go back to this extra constitutional concept, if it was a rogue concept from the very beginning and went against the Constitution, then they're technically not under the umbrella of that law. And so that's kind of the thing that we're fighting here. I don't think the whistleblowers are going to come forward until they feel completely safe to do so. So it'll have to come down from the very top that all of those rulings and restrictions have been completely rescinded. Then we might have an influx of more whistleblowers.
Would these whistleblowers be compensated in any way?
I don't think any whistleblowers would be compensated, but I'm also sure that a lot of them are dying to tell their story because the clock is ticking. And as Stanton Friedman had talked about so many times, we're racing the Undertaker. And at this time, at this late in the game, really the Undertaker has won because this is 60, 70. We're now at the 75th anniversary of Roswell. And how far are we in ufology? I mean, we've made some progress, but we still don't have access to the bodies. We still don't have access to the debris. We still don't have access to the gun camera footage, which we know they have, and it's a fact. So what do we need to do? We've got to get to this evidence. We can't have any more CE1s anymore. That's really completely useless. We need to get to the physical evidence, and then we'll be moving forward.
Just a couple weeks ago, I am directly knowledgeable about the fact that our Air Force sometimes engages kinetically, which means fires upon what we know to be UFOs.
Some of these people have stated that they have regular encounters with these craft, regular encounters. So
are we engaging them with firepower? Are we shooting at them?
No, we're not.
Corbell was saying that we actually have been firing upon these UAPs as of a month or so ago, as of a while ago, and that we've been engaging them in that military aggressive stance. And Congressman Tim actually said the opposite. He said, no, there's no way that we would fire upon these UAPs just for the sheer technological superiority of these vehicles. I mean, can you imagine getting one of these vehicles really pissed at you? If you're just in a conventional jet propulsion engine plane, you know, it wouldn't be good. It just wouldn't be good. And I think the people who give the call, the green light, red light, to go ahead and shoot, I think they know that. They know that. And they feel that dissuasion. They feel that that they shouldn't shoot at these things because it would turn out real bad.
So if the President of the United States wanted to hire SEAL Team 6 or a special force operation to bust down the walls at Area 51 or private corporation, would that be possible?
I don't really think it's going to happen quite that way. In terms of, you know, them busting into places and bringing things out. It's going to be a negotiated situation by using leverage. Now, what does the legal constitutional government of the United States have that these organizations don't have? The rule of law, the Constitution, prosecutorial powers, and subpoena powers. So at a certain point, once I have been giving enough specific information that they have gotten into and seen that this is real, it then becomes a matter of political and social will to bring these projects to heel and put them on a leash so that they're overseen appropriately by we the people and our people's representatives. So that is really how that's going to happen. You know, someone recommended when Obama got inaugurated that I recommend that he go in with tactical nuclear weapons into some of these facilities. And I said, this is the craziest thing I ever heard of. I said, no, we're not going to recommend that. But it wouldn't work anyway because they would just self-destruct all those assets because they have things in place to do that. So it has to be done very smart. You know, now there has to be a serious threat, not a violent threat, of consequences, because ultimately, if a group, organization, corporation stays on that path, they're actually committing treason. And treason can be prosecuted up to and including execution federally. So once you establish that that's what's going on, which we have, then it's about using that power. And as I've said to them many times in the last few months, you're either going to make the U.S. government relevant on this issue or not. And I don't control that. But all I can do is advise, this is the approach you should be taking.
Do you ever feel like you're being watched over here? Like people following you? Do you ever look over your shoulder?
No, I don't worry about that, no. There was a time I did. But, you know, there are other ways to do that, obviously. Even if your cell phone is off, totally off, they're tracking and monitoring. All my email is continuously monitored. Anything important that gets to me gets diverted, as you've seen. Now this is happening now to some of the folks in the investigation here in DC, and I said this is just to be expected. You're not going to, you know, be able to get around that. But it's, you know, look, you know, when you look at the way back in 1950, the Wilbur Smith document where he said this is the most classified project in the history of the United States, exceeding the development of the hydrogen bomb, right? Because we hadn't detonated the hydrogen bomb yet. And it is to this day still in that level, except it went deep black beyond constitutional oversight between 1945 and 1955. That was the decade, by the way, where the whole thing went off the rails. But the technologies and the capabilities they have, even people who are read into National Security Agency, CIA, and National Reconnaissance Office technologies and satellites, they're not read into the means that this organization has, this covert secret government group. And that's why they're always shocked, because they think they're using encryption and everything's known instantly. They think they're, you know, in a skiff, and everything that's done in there is known instantly. And I started warning people that in 1993, when the man who set up my meeting with the CIA director wanted me to be going to phone booths talking in code so nobody would know. And I said, John, this is not going to work. Because even by 93, I'd been read into what the technologies were that can go totally around conventional signals intelligence. So anyway, I just am very patient with it, because I understand the SecOps, security ops that people have to do to comply with their regulations, because they're employed in the government. I, on the other hand, have never been in the government. I've paid a few $1 million in taxes, but I've never gotten an Indian head nickel. But that's something I just understand, because that's the way, you know, their world works. But I just tell them, don't expect it to keep you from being tracked and monitored in real time. I mean, after all, except for the names and personal confidences I keep, which I'm very strict about, you figure I'm not going to keep a secret from any of these guys. As Ben Rich said, there are no private conversations anywhere on the planet. That was one of the things Ben Rich said in that lecture. And that's true, by the way. So, once you realize that, then why waste the time? I tell people strategically, if you do a lot of, spy versus spy weirdness, trying to be so paranoid, then all you're doing is slowing yourself and your team down, but you're not slowing down your adversaries here, the people who are, the criminal organization doing this, because they've got technologies that are many generations ahead of what even folks who are managing the black budget know about. So, at a certain point, once you realize that, it's very liberating. Why? Because you don't have to keep a secret. You just, like I said, the only thing when I'm talking to people is that if I have, if a colonel or some operative out of Area 51 contacts me and wants their name to be kept strictly quiet, I keep their confidence, But other than that, the information, and it's sort of like the Chatham House rules in London, the think tank. I went to a secret meeting once and they invoked the Chatham House rules. And what that is, it means that you can share anything you hear at the meeting, but you can't cite who said it. You can't disclose who the source was. So I was there as the keynote, talking about these technologies and this issue to a whole group of elites on an island off the coast of Australia. There was about 120 global elites there. But the reality is more than 90% of all the men and a few women that come to me, they're not wanting to have their identities known in the public. They may be happy to let their identities be known to the folks that I'm providing materials to here in Washington, but not to the general public. So I go, okay, that's your requirement. So I think there's, a whole ethics around this, which is also very old-fashioned, some would say, but being trained as a doctor, it's like doctor-patient privilege. So and they know I'm going to be very strict about that. So.
One of the problems you run into when you're dealing with an area where you absolutely need and require a security clearance, and you've signed a non-disclosure agreement, what are the ramifications if you decide to go public? Bob Lazar did it. He decided that it was worth the risk because he felt that his life was in danger, and that may be the catalyst that makes someone else decide, I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to go public on what I know, what I've seen. And that has to happen. There's got to be legislation put forward. Now, I don't think it's going to happen with this president, maybe his replacement. But it has to be done because this information has to get out. If we are being visited by interdimensional beings from wherever, we should know about it. We should be prepared. I mean, if you don't know who your adversary is, if you don't know who the enemy of the people are, besides the federal government, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. And I'm talking about the world in general, not just individuals, and I want to know. And I've been criticized for asking, demanding answers from my government, but it is my government, and it's for the people, by the people. There are people in some of these organizations who feel that, they are God Almighty. They have all the information, and we can control your destiny by what we know, and we're not going to share that information with you. And to me, that's baloney. That's un-American, and that's just wrong.
Well, this is a big question. Is like, if we can make this happen, an actual honest disclosure of this subject would include not only the fact that we're not alone in the universe and that we need a diplomatic effort to reach out to these civilizations, but the 70 years of research and development of astonishing technologies that would transform the world, those would begin to come out. And the world in 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now won't even look like this planet. I mean, every aspect of our civilization will just be raised to a much higher level of prosperity, abundance, free, clean energy. Transport eventually will be above ground. So, it's a very exciting world. And, once you get to the point where civilization has that kind of abundance and social justice, then you can actually begin talking about having peace globally. And so the whole world can take this big leap forward, a quantum movement forward, but it's not going to happen unless we change what we're doing. And this is why I left my medical career, because the implications of this is the difference between us heading in the direction we are now, which is an extinction level civilization, versus one that's going to take off to the stars and go forever. It's beautiful. So that's the consequences. This happened, unfortunately, to the Trump administration. I was trying to intervene when they were being approached by people who were going into the White House with briefing dossiers filled with these terrifying accounts so that they could convince the president and the vice president that there was an alien threat. And unfortunately, they were so convinced, and subsequently we got something called the Space Force. which has various purposes, but part of it is to be kicked into gear. Once they disclose falsely there being a threat from outer space. So this is something that is, people say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. I said, no, there are conspiracies that are facts. There is something called the mafia. There are criminal conspiracies. The people running these projects are the largest conspiracy of criminals in the history of the world, bar none. There's nothing that comes close. Now, I can prove that in a court of law. What I just said can be proven. But we hope it doesn't get to that. What we hope is that the truth can come out. we don't know anything about this. But the people who said we don't know anything about it didn't. Because again, there are two governments. There's the government of we the people, and as Senator Inouye from Hawaii said, there's a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that's above the law and free from the law itself. I'm paraphrasing, but it's very close to the quote. Well, when you have that situation, an innocent civilian harmed by one of these illegal black projects, deep black, those guys are going to have to, they're going to deny an involvement because they're black. They're not acknowledged as existing. So when someone goes through a FOIA request or the main government literally, when they say, we don't know anything about this, they know nothing about it. So this is one of the big problems. It's like it's two parallel universes between the secret government and the mainstream legal constitutional government. And this Cash Landrum case is one of hundreds and hundreds like that, all over the world, not just US. I mean, that CIA document from 1985 states explicitly it was a psychological warfare operation staging alien abductions with poor villagers in Brazil and Argentina. I'm recommending that document be subpoenaed from the people who I know hold it. And I know 3 people who hold that document who will not release it. I think they're afraid of being killed. But that's really what the agenda is. And it's not hard to do. Moreover, there have been a number of accidents that have been like the test flying or a malfunction of a man-made anti-grav, alien reproduction vehicle, whatever you want to call them, where they will then make it look like it was some alien, unknown UFO, UAP thing. Because it's a great cover story. It's a great cover story for all kinds of accidents. You just sort of blame it on the aliens, right? So this is very easy to do when people don't have enough knowledge. So knowledge is power. And if you have a government here and abroad, other governments who don't have this knowledge, they're powerless over the folks who do and who can do circles around them. Not only technologically, but in terms of staging things. So this is the big vulnerability I started warning about in the 90s. Like when I was briefing the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Hughes, that was the whole subject matter. Was why he didn't know, how vulnerable he was, how vulnerable the Pentagon was. Because everyone thinks that the government is hiding UFOs. I said, most of the people in the government know nothing about this issue. This is why I'm here a lot, meeting with folks. The bigger issue is why don't they know and who does know? And what's the architecture of that secrecy? Because in my mind, that is the biggest security threat to the United States and the world happening in the last 50 years. More than the Cold War, more than China. This is and it's not an alien national security threat, it's from within. And there's a great quote about how the worst enemies are the treasonous people from within. So now luckily there are a lot of people now here in Washington in high places who have concluded, as I did back 30 years ago, that this group conducting these programs are in fact the breakaway treasonous people. And if they do not come clean, they need to be treated that way.
If the world was able to see exactly what was going on behind the veil with these black budget, top secret projects, these secret space programs that do exist that are being run out of private corporations, they'd be blown away. First and foremost, the reason why they're using private corporations is because then they can avoid the Freedom of Information Act. Because with that FOIA, they can actually then release all the information to the public, even if it's redacted. But through private corporations, now they can hide everything, they can cover everything up. And what happens behind the scenes is advanced technology that's 300 years ahead of what the general population is at right now. So whatever you can think of has already happened. Whatever you can possibly even conceive already exists. That's how far advanced they are. But by keeping these things locked up in black budget programs and using them for top secret military projects, the general population is only going to get this information one slight trickle at a time.
When you're talking about the USAP programs, the unacknowledged special access programs, that are the programs where as Dr. Greer had mentioned before, that if you're working on those type programs and the president asks you for specific details regarding that program, your mandatory reply is to be, Mr. President, no such project exists. So in that way, they're able to compartmentalize different programs, different projects, different locations. We kind of talked about where these crash retrievals are kept. There's multiple repositories around the country where these debris, bodies, craft are allegedly being stored. Examples would be Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Langley Air Force Base, Virginia, Homestead Air Force Base, Florida, MacDill Air Force Base, Florida. All allegedly locations where debris and bodies are being kept.
What kind of projects? Do you have an example?
Okay, I've got an example for you, a specific example. Time frame is 1952, and the primary eyewitness is working at the Pentagon. She goes down to a lower level, and I don't know how this actually went down, but she accidentally bumped into a room that she wasn't supposed to go inside. So you can picture there's this dark, musty, dingy room. It's very poorly lit, and there's some boxes off to the side. She kind of goes into this room. She kind of makes about a 180 degree, and what does she see kind of sitting off to the side? About a 3-foot tall, quote unquote, pickled alien in a glass jar. And within like 10 seconds, she feels this very firm hand on her shoulder, and it was an MP. Again, this is 1952 at the lower level of the Pentagon. And this MP says, you are not supposed to be here. He got her out of that immediately. And you can see here, so very concerned look on her face, but she did see a pickled alien in a glass jar at the underground facility at the Pentagon in 1952. So if this woman's testimony is true, and we have no reason to believe that it's not, they do have the physical evidence that we need as a coalition of ufologists to move this field forward.
This is what happens when you have 70 years of illegal, corrupt, beyond black projects. And you have, generations of people who have been in government, some, for 30, 40 years, who have no idea what's been going on beneath the surface. To the point that some of these folks who are at that level of oversight, and oversight of the intelligence community and the black budget of the United States, they didn't know that there were DUMBs, deep underground military bases. They didn't know there were connectors between, say, Edwards Air Force Base and that facility and the Nellis Range, so-called Area 51. I had to dredge up the actual blueprints of the machine that built them and told them about which corporations, like Bechtel Corporation and others, that ran and built those with a beyond black budget authorization. So all of this gets to be very complicated, including the money. So one of the first questions was, how is this being funded? I said, well, several mechanisms. One, they'll say the B-2 stealth bomber costs $2 billion a copy. Actually probably costs more like $100 million, $150 million. The rest is diverted into a black project that they don't know about and have not approved. Now, that is, in fact, embezzlement of U.S. federal taxpayer dollars. The other issue is corporations that have gotten spin-offs of these technologies that have been studied since the 40s and 50s, the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial advanced systems, who then have it pass on some of that information to a corporate public entity that can then sell you a fiber optic system or a night vision system or an advanced integrated circuits and things of this sort. So that creates a profit center for subsidiaries of these corporations. And of course, the darkest is the illegal running of both arms and drugs by some elements, the darkest elements of these covert groups. And that is not an urban myth, that is real. And I had two men. One was a senior executive with SAIC, the Science Applications International Corporation. And the other one was a former congressman who was a bit of a consigliere for George H.W. Bush, a senior. And they both, I met with them here in Crystal City near the Pentagon at the congressman's condo. And they explained to me how there was an army of 8,000 men that were running drugs illegally, that were under cover of military, covert, secret projects, and that this was destroying things. I mean, it's an absolute destruction of our planet.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time. Director Deutsch, I will refer you to 3 specific agency operations known as Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower. I have Watchtower documents heavily redacted by the agency. I was personally exposed to CIA operations and recruited by CIA personnel who attempted to recruit me in the late 70s to become involved in protecting agency drug operations in this country. I have been trying to get this out for 18 years, and I have the evidence.
So we had this long discussion about the rot and the danger of this kind of secrecy, because if no one's controlling them or watching them, all kinds of things can happen, and that's what has happened. So this is now let's talk about what this is really about. It's really about the renewal of democracy, because everyone says, oh, we're in a free country and a democracy. But how free and how democratic can it be if the most important technologies, the most important discoveries are kept from the media and the public and our policymakers? Remember, Jimmy Carter demanded to know about this, and the outgoing CIA director, and we have this from people who were involved at the time, told the incoming president, we're not going to tell you anything. So that's happened. Bill Clinton explicitly made inquiries and was denied information. So, I'm not speculating when I say that, when you do that, this is why in a court of law, you can prove that these projects are being run illegally and unconstitutionally. So that's a matter of fact. And that's happened to presidents since Eisenhower. I remember Eisenhower lost control of these projects in the late 50s. And that's when these entire operations just sort of got big enough and powerful enough to sort of go off on their own and would disclose what they wanted to the president. So I think that's why it takes someone who's willing to issue, subpoenas and investigate and get to the bottom of it, which is happening now. The question is, how far are they going to be able to go before they get sat down? All this boils down to one word: courage. If you have the courage to do it, fine. If you don't, then you're irrelevant. And that's why when after I briefed Clinton's CIA director, his friend came down to my house and said, well, they're convinced the president will end up like Jack Kennedy. And I thought it was a joke. And he said, no. I said, well, he's the president, I'm not. So if you want to be the president, or if you want to be a member of the Senate or House, you have an obligation and a responsibility. Now, if you want to shirk it, then you can't complain about the fact that this is an out-of-control black project. So you either have to, step up to the plate or get off, move out of the way. But for decades, people have not been willing to do either. They just have too intimidated because of the threats and bribes and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I've had so many of my colleagues that I started working with who've gotten threats or buy-offs and then were subsequently corrupted. So I think that's, one of the real problems in a city like this, where you spread enough money around, you twist enough arms, you get what you want. So I always say the indispensable currency in all this, to me, isn't money. It's the courage to do it. And if you don't have the courage to do it, then you've just made yourself, whether you're the president or whether you're the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee or whoever, you've made yourself irrelevant. So being relevant on something like this means having the courage to go the distance.
So there's something there, we just don't know what it is.
Do you think it could possibly be Russia or another foreign adversary?
That's why we need to find out, because if there is an adversary with that kind of technology, then we definitely need to be very, very careful.
How much they know, I don't know. I know I've been dealing with some people in Russia who are very informed on the subject. I don't know to what extent Putin or Xi in China are involved or briefed on it. I just don't have anyone at that level in those governments. Here, I do. But in the United States and Great Britain and other countries. But so that's a big question mark. Interestingly, there are members of the Senate who've been questioning whether these UAPs are from China, which they're not. But I think that's one of the problems is that during even the Cold War, there were events with UFOs that were mistaken as a possible incoming threat from the Soviet Union. And something like that is dangerous. So I think this is another reason why the extreme secrecy on this issue is a danger to operational, tactical decisions that are being made at the Pentagon or CIA or wherever, because most of those guys don't know what these objects are. So something could happen, they think, oh, that's coming from China or Russia or whatever, and it isn't. It's coming, it's either it could be a man-made UFO or it could be an extraterrestrial one. So not having that in your algorithm, not having that in your list of things, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe it's this, that is really dangerous. And I think this is a big problem that doesn't get talked about in the media. There's a threat to the national security that's very severe related to UFOs. But it's not that the UFOs from outer space are a threat, the human secrecy is a threat. And that's what the first director of the CIA wrote to the New York Times in a letter, and we have the letter, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, where he said the secrecy around UFOs is a threat to the national security. This is 1960 or 61. So that, don't take my opinion, take the opinion of the very first director of the CIA.
There was a statement of the 5 felons from Lou Elizondo in contact with this lure as well, and they were talking back and forth. And these statements were leaked out to everyone, and they really showed what Lou Elizondo is really all about. I mean, they're actually accusations of the Felon 5 saying that all these people, John Greenwald of the Black Vault, Third Phase of Moon, and Dr. Greer, and a couple of others. I know these people, and for anyone to say that they are charlatans or they're criminals or they have a criminal record, it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. Anyone who's talked with any of these individuals, anybody who's talked with John Greenwald, with Dr. Greer, with Third Phase of Moon, knows that these are people who are utterly dedicated to their purpose, which is to bring the truth to people, bring real things to people that people can actually use. And that's what Dr. Greer has dedicated his life to. That's what John Greenwald is just a super intellect. He's just a huge intellect. He's not a person who has any iota of criminality about him at all. And Third Phase of Moons, they're just guys who just care about bringing the truth in an area that has so much fakery in it, so much fakery. Which brings me back to Lou Elizondo. Lou Elizondo is just using standard techniques of a CIA contractor. That's what they teach them. They teach them to envelope whoever the enemy is, whoever's speaking out against you. You're supposed to wrap them up with false accusations, counterclaims, and the more scurrilous and baseless the accusations are, the better, because you're trying to create outrage. You're trying to show people that they can't mess with you.
Green Street, Greenwald, Third Phase of Moon, and yourself, the Felon 5.
Yes, I like this. That people who are the mouthpieces for an unconstitutional, rogue, criminal organization calls people who are actually truth tellers, the felons, and I've been called that for years. Back in the 90s, there were a group of these guys who basically said, I'm a traitor to my country. When in reality, these people are creating high crimes and misdemeanors and treason by deceiving the public, lying to the president, lying to the Congress, taking hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions over the years, and putting them into unapproved projects that the Congress doesn't know they're spending the money on, and we can prove that also. So, but of course, people like that are always going to accuse other people of what they themselves are guilty of. Just remember that.
And one of the things that just irks the hell out of me is when we're in a relatively small community, those of us that investigate and look into the unexplained. And there are people out there that are getting an awful lot of media coverage that aren't, they aren't doing themselves or our area of interest any good. When you're slamming people for being unprofessional, slamming people for being incompetent. I mean, and again, it's the people who are, the people who are saying that are the 3 or 4 talking heads that you see all the time. I mean, it's Lou, it's Jeremy, it's Nick, and a few others, and they keep going to the same ones. They're not coming up with any answers. Yet they feel it's their duty to trash people like the Cousin Brothers who go out and they get the news. They're the first ones there. Why should you be jealous of that?
Just the fact that he would just scurrilously make accusations like this, the release of these emails really show what kind of person Elizondo is, and that's why. Anyone going forward from here, anyone who associates with him in the ufology community or anywhere else, they're just taking their own life into their hands by associating with this guy, because he will turn on them at any moment, just like he did with these 5 people who he actually has had contacts with in the past. And he turned on a dime because that's his training. I'm telling you, that's what it is. He's trained to do this, and he'll continue to do this as long as he's around.
They do a flip, So the only way they know how to handle it is they accuse other people what they themselves are doing.
Have you ever had a felon?
What?
When he calls us, we're not felons. Are you a felon? Have you ever had?
Oh, I've never had a felony, of course not. I mean, you couldn't have a medical license, for one thing, which I have. But anyway, this is the typical what happens is the people who are the whistleblowers always get attacked by very powerful interests that are being exposed for their criminal activities. And that's a really typical response from people who know they're wrong.
It's doing a disservice to all of us, not just the ones that they're bad-mouthing, but to the entire industry. And if you come across as a bunch of crybabies and say, well, so-and-so is an ass, and so-and-so is incompetent, and so-and-so doesn't know what the hell he's doing, well, it also reflects on you. I mean, in today's world, all you see nowadays are people slamming other people, and it's not right.
Unfortunately, that you just have to, if you're doing this kind of work, which I've been doing for 30 years now, you just take it as a given that you're going to have these sort of attacks hurled at you, and all kinds of defamation and accusations. And I don't think, I tell people you just have to get battle hardened if you're taking on the most powerful group of criminal, moneyed people in the world, and this is what this is. I mean, there's no question that the group that's keeping this stuff secret, they have the most power, the greatest technologies, the most influence of any group in the world, certainly more than 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue up here.
I sure hope to hell, before my time is up, that we get full disclosure, that Dr. Greer and his soldiers, all the men and women that support his effort, and all the fans and dedicated people that support the effort of the Cousin Brothers and Michael Schratt and others that are we're just trying to find information. We're just trying to do what any human being would do. I'm curious to who are these people, and I'm hoping before I start pushing up weeds, that I'm hoping that there's an answer. I'm hoping there's full disclosure, and they tell us, okay, this is where we came from, this is where we're going, this is how they got here, this is what it means to civilization and humanity in general. And I'm hoping that day comes while I'm still here. Now, I'm fearful I'm going to live to be 105, and I keep having recurring dreams that I'm still around in 2050. And hopefully something will happen by then. Hopefully something will happen before the end of the year.
And if not?
Pardon?
And if not?
And if not, I'm going to come back and I'm going to hunt all you bastards that wouldn't release the information. If my mom can do it, she was born on Halloween, and you know, she had an incredible spirit, and I have some of that same spirit in me. But if there isn't disclosure when my day comes, I'm going to come back and I'm going to be one hunting son of a bitch, and I'm going to make life miserable for everybody that denied us access and full disclosure.
The entire field of ufology has this strange self-protection automatic system built into it because it's so crazy, it's so outlandish, it's just so oddball sounding. Bodies and aliens and craft and debris in a big cover-up, and it's been lasting for 75 years and we have nothing to prove. So you can see it's got this self-protection fail-safe mechanism built into it. The story is so crazy, the government really doesn't have to do too much to keep their secrets because it's so outlandish. We're the ones, you know, keeping the cover-up alive because we're talking about these stories. And so you can see how it's easy for the government to keep this secret because the story is so crazy. Without that physical evidence, we'll always be in this zone of mockery and belittling, and the giggle factor is still alive even after all these congressional hearings. What we need to pierce through is the Leonard Stringfield crash retrieval case's actual physical evidence. Then we got something.
So it's easy to trigger the fear, and people are going to assume it's from outer space, it's a threat, oh my God, I'm so scared. So it would be nothing at this point, after 70 years of this kind of planning, brainwashing, disinformation, to have one singular event happen. It could be a fairly minor event. That'd be it.